Join me on a beautiful Thursday here in Australia. Today we're going to talk about why E46s are the perfect project car. This is a really noisy bird. So E46s are the perfect project car. So people used to be obsessed with the E36, turning them into drift cars and track cars. Now the problem with the E36 is that they're getting a bit old and a lot of them have been pranked or rolled, and they're also getting quite expensive these days. That's the baby and that's the mother. It's about 8 weeks old, the baby. E46s on the other hand, they made more E46s and they're actually a better chassis. They are a lot more rigid than an E36. But the biggest reason why you should buy one now before it's too late is because they've got front suspension is McPherson strut, the rear suspension is multi-link rear, which has got 3 axes of movement. It's a really good design. It's a front engine, rear wheel drive, fair bit of space under the bonnet or hood if you're from the US. The weight distribution is 51% front, 49% rear, depends on the engine you have, and they're really cheap and they make a great basis for a project car. So currently E46s are worth almost nothing these days. A couple of years ago E36s were worth hardly anything. Like you could get a 323 or a 320i manual for about two grand. Now a 320i manual is worth 8-9 grand here in Australia. In the US, I believe you only got the 325 and 328. In Canada, you got the same as us, but in left-hand drive. So 318i, 320, 323, 325, 328. Australia didn't get any of the diesel variants. Like there's the 325 TDS, which is actually pretty cool to be honest. I sort of wish we got that, but they're an awesome option. So for about 10 grand, you can get yourself a real weapon. You can get yourself some E46 sedan coupe, 318, 320, doesn't really matter what you get. You can get a crate LS motor for about 4 grand. Now we're talking 5.3 long block. We're not talking an LSA crate engine with a connect and cruise package, which is about $18,000 or so before tariffs and GST. Or you can get yourself a junkyard LS, a T56, a Ford 8.8 rear end, or if you get a medium case like a 325, well, 323, 325, 328, they come with the medium case rear diff, which is, if you're drifting, it's not going to be strong enough, but if it's your daily driver or you're taking it to the track and you're easy on the drive line, it'll be fine. Custom tail shaft, ECU and harness, and you're good to go. So at $10,000 you can get all of that. So $10,000 gets you a car that would beat most cars on the road. Now, in terms of legalities, here in Australia, we're like pretty strict on this sort of stuff. Every time you do an engine swap, it needs to be engineered, is what they call it. So even if you have a stock engine, but you increase the power by more than 20%, that needs to be engineered. So you need supporting mods, so suspension, brakes, and there's only a certain limit to which they'll allow you to increase the power to before they won't engineer it. So if you're in Australia and you wanted to LS swap an E46 and to do it all legally, there's no way it's only going to cost $10,000. It's probably going to cost you closer to 20 or 30. Some people spend $25,000 to $30,000 just on the swap itself, not including the car, and assuming that you do the labor yourself. So costs can vary massively. But the cheapest thing to do is to buy a donor car, rip all the running gear out of it, and then put it in your E46. So if you live in the US, there's a plethora of LS cars that you can use as donor cars. Here in Australia, we really only got the Holden Commodore that has an LS in it with the right drivetrain that you can rip out of it. Now, ripping it out and putting it straight in an E46 is not that easy, but it's all a relative term. An LS swap is one of the easiest options that you can put in an E46. You can buy off-the-shelf swap kits from motor mounts, fuel hoses, steam port kit, exhaust manifolds. You can buy everything off the shelf. It's a little bit harder buying an off-the-shelf swap kit if you live in a right-hand drive country, because the steering column has to clear the driver's side exhaust manifold, but a lot of the swap kits are for left-hand drive cars. But even still, biggest problem you'll have is the exhaust manifold, which there are a few companies that sell right-hand drive swap kits. You don't have to use an LS, but it's the most budget-conscious option. Other really good options are N54s are not the best option because there aren't many people that make a standalone. You can buy a Sidex ECU for the N54. The problem is finding an ECU that can control direct injection and Vanos and 6 individual coils. Now, the N54 doesn't have Valvetronic. The N55 does. cars, there's also a lot of N55s around. So the N55 also makes a really good option as well. And because the N55 is a newer engine that's emissions compliant to a higher level, as in most E46s are Euro 4, N55s are Euro Class 5. So getting it engineered from an emissions point of view would be a relatively easy thing to do. Assuming that you use the stock downpipe, air breather, intake, you just leave everything stock. But again, with the N55, it's the same problem with the ECU and the wiring harness, where you either have to use the stock ECU, which is a real mission because the stock ECU runs on CAN bus and it needs the CAS module, which is the comfort access system, which needs the key to send a signal to actually make it start. Now, if you're swapping an N55 in your E46, you don't have the corresponding key that engine came out of. Well, you probably don't. You may do, but it's a real headache. So it's not a very cost-effective option, even though it makes a lot of sense. So E46s are a great option to build your next project car. E36s are great. It's just that there aren't as many around anymore and they're a lot more expensive. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like this video and subscribe. Also, check out the website. I've just launched a new brand, MC Aviation. You guys seem to love the aviation content that I'm doing, which is really good. So check that out and stay tuned for more.